Cool. So let's get started. Everyone, you've already had a chance to, hear Aakash, but I'm quite thrilled to be hosting Aakash here today. Um, as you know, this is the HarperCollins FDC. Aakash's latest book, which I've had a chance to read, is this one, Becoming Baba Saheb. And this is his biography, but the first part of his biography. It goes from 1891 to 1929. And this is his latest book, but overall, Aakash is a philosopher of international repute and the author of 9 books, including the best-selling Ambedkar's Preamble, A Secret History of the Constitution of India. He's also edited over a dozen books, ranging from political philosophy and law to religion and literature. Sorry, I'm letting someone in here. Yeah. And that includes B.R. Ambedkar's The Buddha and his Dhamma, a critical edition. And more recently, B.R. Ambedkar, A Quest for Justice. A Quest for Justice is a box set of 5 volumes. His Hegel's India was shortlisted for the Nonfiction Book of the Year at the Tata Lit Live Book Awards in 2017. Professor Rathore, aka Aakash, has taught politics, philosophy, and law at JNU and many other universities in many parts of the world. Aakash serves as the senior editor for the 15-volume Rethinking India book series and was co-editor of its first volume, Vision for a Nation. He's also the series editor for 2 well-known, renowned international academic series, which cover topics like religion, ethics, and politics. And the last bit, which is the very, very interesting bit, is that Professor Rathore is also one of India's top-ranking Ironman triathletes. I'll explain a little bit what that means. But it does give me a major complex because I'm a bit of a marathon runner, and that sounds like taking a walk in the park when you talk to an Ironman triathlete. So welcome, Aakash, and it's great to have you. It's great to have you on the show. So yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, Chetan. Thanks for the invitation. I've been following on social media ever since this came up a couple of months ago, trying to see what you do there and what the First Drafts Club is about and so on. And I'm quite excited about it. It looks like the ideal sort of thing that I would like to have done had I thought of it. So I'm envious of you also for having thought of it first, and also interested in possibly coming to the retreat. So you've tempted me with the idea of seeing what it's like. Can you show us?
Oh, you want to look at the retreat? Okay, what I'll do is I'm in the wrong place right now, but let me step out and see if I can give a quick glimpse while people are still out again. So there's many parts to the retreat, and there's rooms, and don't have that much of a view today, but I'll try and give you a glimpse. So this is what it looks like from where I stand in my balcony.
Wow! Oh my goodness!
And today, and you can see it's all green. There's no construction because we are actually in a village, not in a big city. And on a clear day in the distance there, you can see snow-capped peaks, and you can see, like 3 days ago, we could see Nanda Devi. And from here, we can see the peaks of Garhwal, Kumaon, and Nepal. So it's quite a picturesque place, if I say so myself. And the place where all the action happens is actually a place called the Book Lounge, which is where we meet up when we do all our sessions. So that's this guy here. There's some people in there now, so we're not gonna go in, but yeah. So that's a bit of the place. But thank you for asking it.
No, wonderful. How many people are there?
Right now, we just finished a workshop on screenwriting yesterday. That was with a lady called Anu Singh Chaudhary, who's also a Harper published author. So right now there's nobody, but we'll have the next group of people arriving day after.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. I look forward to a visit. It looks like the ideal place to to write.
Yeah, in fact, we've just started a residency with the French government. So they're actually going to be sending authors our way once or twice a year, who will be just coming, staying, and working on their private projects. So
Nice.
that's something that's ongoing right now. Great. So coming back to your work in your writing, Aakash. So you're an academic and a highly respected one, and you've done a lot of work. So you have some recurring fascinations. Hegel turns up and others, but of course, at the top of the heap is Ambedkar. I mean, you've done a lot of your work is around him. So tell us about this. Where does that come from, or is that a choice, or is that just a fascination you always had? How does it work?
Yeah, so working on Ambedkar is a bit off of my academic discipline. I was actually originally a lawyer, trained as a lawyer. I was such a bad lawyer that I left after 1 year. I had fulfilled my parents' wish by doing that, and then as soon as I had accomplished it, I realized that they were wrong, and there's no way I'll survive the next 30 years like this. So I moved into academia, but into academic philosophy and political science. So the intersection there, political philosophy. So Ambedkar was never thought of as really a philosopher, though now he's recognized as one. But my interest actually was quite a personal one. Like Ambedkar, my father was a professor at Columbia University, so I grew up on that campus at Columbia University.
Nice.
And I studied at LSE. So Ambedkar had been at Columbia, had been at LSE. He was also a lawyer. I was also a lawyer. He was a good one. I was a bad one. So there were these very curious overlaps, coincidences. And finally, when I married my wife, she's from an Ambedkarite background, family, and the community, and which I wasn't. And long discussions and getting personal familiarity really intrigued me. And so it's been, I think I did my first real work on Ambedkar about 2005, 6, 7, something like that. So it's really taken over, how the public knows about me as an author, because my other books, they're all on very different topics. So I don't have one kind of readership. I have many different groups of readers, and the largest one are certainly the ones interested in Ambedkar.
Wow, I didn't realize there was so much overlaps. That's quite fascinating.
Yeah.
So I'm reading Becoming Baba Sahib right now, and it's quite a revelation in many ways. I'm learning a lot about him. But in the book, you also question, and in many cases, you outright debunk the previous kind of traditional wisdom about him and the sources from which it comes. And you're not depending upon third-hand information. Instead, you're questioning accepted wisdom and reestablishing the facts yourself. And so does that make you like a rebel, or does that get you a lot of, do you have a lot of new enemies of late, or what's the implication of something like that?
I do have, and this is something for authors to think about, because I don't know about you, Chetan, but I think a lot of authors are have insecurities. So, what are the readers going to think about this? Drafting their prose with the reader in mind rather than their own heart and mind. And, there comes a time where that's useful, but I think really early, young writers, first-time writers and so on, need to sort of remain truer to their own heart and mind. So this is something that has come up, that I made a number of enemies by debunking the previous biographies, partly because their authors are so famous and well known. In fact, the Dhananjay Kher, who I take to task most, is the #1 cited book in all of Ambedkar studies. So not about biographies, but even if you look at the political philosophy of Ambedkar, constitution writing, religious conversion, all of the aspects of Ambedkar, Kher's book is the most widely cited universally. So people took it as hubris, audacity on my part. I'm a Johnny come lately, I joined this group of around 15 years back or so, and Kher is a 70-year-old stalwart. So I made some enemies, but why I gave that little preamble about writing for others or writing for oneself is because at the same time, for every person established in the Ambedkar movement or scholarship tradition and so on, for every person, there have been 10 to 20 who have said, we're so happy that you did this because we always suspected something like what you're telling us, but we had never articulated it and we never had the evidence to prove it. And that was really, so I'm delighted that somehow I found the courage to be that audacious, because while I have made some strong enemies, there are so many more people, also ordinary people, ordinary readers, who said that, who are very, very thankful that I went rogue like this.
Went rogue, I like that. It's interesting. Cool. So, so now, if you're coming from this place of academic rigor, and you're like deeply steeped in your research and what you're actually working on, and then I'm sure you come across a lot of writing, especially nonfiction writing, which might bother you, or it might seem half-baked. I mean, it's obvious in the things that you mentioned in the book. So do you have any advice or any suggestions for writers here about how they should think about research and what all they need to do when they're thinking of research?
Yeah, I think so. This is not an uncontroversial position, but I'm experienced enough to where I think there might be some utility and relevance in what I'm going to say. I had early on in my writing career, so I'm on, I think, 9 authored books, 10. The 10th is coming with the 2nd volume of the biography.
Yeah.
But you can count that 5-volume edition as 1 book, or you can count it as 5. It certainly felt like 5 when I was doing it. I'm on, in that case, the 26th book now, when you put together edited books and authored books.
Right. Okay.
So I'm speaking from that experience, and that is the real concern or issue I have, is that often writers, especially younger ones, think that a book is written by putting together a number of other books, shaking them up, and letting something new drop out, some kind of synthetic activity. And there are 2 things that are completely missing from that. One is original research, so kind of archival research, going beyond what is written in the books and trying to understand what is really there in the repository of wherever that information comes from. If you're writing about art, you need to go to the paintings or the sculptors or the films themselves. If you're writing about history, you need to visit the archives and the sites and so on. So one is going beyond the book to the sources of those earlier books themselves. And the second, completely other side, is one's own original experience. And if you don't remain compelled to this is so hard to explain because it's not easy to do and it's not easy to understand. Basically, books often are authorities for us, and so we don't want to defy those authorities. We may want to criticize them, we may want to synthesize them, put them together, but it's not that often that you just want to say that my own experience tells me that all of this is wrong, untrue, or irrelevant. And that conviction needs to be there. So instead of creating a new book out of mixing together the 10 previous books on the subject, go beyond those books by finding their sources on the one hand, and then go way outside of that whole domain by remaining true to your own conviction. You know, what interested you in that project in the first place? What was it that inspired you? And just, you know, focus very much on being yourself in that respect, and not trying to be other authors, not trying to be your predecessors, and so on. Have your own voice.
Right. I love that description, taking 10 books, shaking them up together, and then seeing what comes out of it, I think. And
as a professor, that's what I see the majority of my doctoral students doing. Every doctoral thesis that I get is just a compilation of everyone who came before them. And I tell them, where are you? You know, I want to know, what do you have to say about this? You can disagree with Hegel. Yeah. You know, I won't, you know, so finding that is something that maybe people are scared to do.
And I remember in the book, you have this conversation between Ambedkar and his father, where they're talking about the Ramayana, and he actually turns around and he says, you know, I'm not so fond of XYZ character. And that is rebellion. But you're sort of doing the same thing that he was doing like 100 years ago. So, yeah, that was fascinating. Yeah,
it's worth doing. An author needs, I mean, we'll discuss this much more later, I'm sure, but an author needs his or her own voice. Otherwise, you're just a photocopy machine.
And of course, when you think of that little anecdote, and then you think about the later, you know, association with Savarkar, it makes sense, right? It makes sense that a boy who thought like that so early would not then toe the line, like he's been made out to do by so much of the world. So that was fascinating. Cool. My next question, and this is where we talk about stereotypes. So, you know, we have this, you know, public perception or stereotypes. I'm starting. That's the cliche that academics are these absent-minded professor types, and, you know, philosophers are into abstract concepts, and they're into big existential questions. So their own bodies are nothing but a small speck in the universe, right? On a speck in the universe. And here you are, and you're a triathlete, and you're an Ironman triathlete. And so for those of you who don't know, an Ironman triathlete is a mere mortal who first runs 42 kilometers, after which they ride a bicycle for 115, how many?
180 kilometers.
180.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 115 miles or thereabouts, but 180 kilometers. And then you swim. And you swim, I think, 3 miles, right?
4 kilometers. So
okay, so 2 point something miles.
So
4 kilometers. And you don't do this like one day at a time. You do all of this back to back. So you run the full marathon, then you ride the bicycle, and then you get in the water. And it takes anywhere from, you know, I don't know, 10, 15 hours to finish the entire event. And so you're a philosopher and an academic. So it doesn't fit, you know. This whole Ironman triathlete thing is just, it makes it very hard for us to put you in a box. So is that just inherent? Have you always done that? And do you also see a lot of other academics / philosophers out there, you know, running and cycling and walk and swimming, or are you an exception in that space?
Yeah, no, I certainly don't see any others. It has been a fascination with me. One of my favorite writers is Yukio Mishima.
Oh, okay.
Sorry,
I was going to say Murakami because he's also a triathlete, but
Murakami, yes. So Murakami, it's interesting that you mentioned another Japanese author, because I think this goes back to the Bushido tradition in a way, which they called harmony of the sword and the pen. And when we think about samurai today, we see them as a gladiator type or something like this. But when you read the actual literature from that era, they were more the intellectual, the scholar. So this idea, Murakami has incorporated it, let's say, in a decaffeinated way. Yukio Mishima was absolute full-on caffeine. He was a bodybuilder, he was a samurai, and in fact, so just a little to understand him, he's referred to as the Japan's Shakespeare. He was regarded in the early mid 20th century as the greatest living writer of his day. He was offered the Nobel Prize, but he withdrew so that the other Japanese, his senior, could win it shortly before his death. So he was also very noble and generous character. On top of that, he I don't even know how to say this. He attempted an overthrow of the Japanese government. Himself and his private army of samurai. And when he took over the Ministry of Defense and he wanted Japan to go back to an emperor system, because of course the samurai, like troubadours or whatever, they work for the emperor, and when he failed, he committed ritual suicide, seppuku, by disemboweling himself with his sword as his number one chopped off his head with a sword. So very bizarre person in that respect. But most people don't know these things about him, and they just know his literature, and it is the finest that you can find in the world. So I became a Mishima enthusiast when I was a child, actually. The first novel of his I read, I just couldn't believe it. And then I just read book after book after book. And then he wrote an autobiography, and that autobiography in English was called Sun and Steel. In Japanese, it's called Bunbu, which means, again, those two different things, like the physical and the intellectual. And so from, I think, that experience, and then my understanding of Ernest Hemingway was another writer I was in love with. And Hemingway, was an avid boxer, and he thought the greatest defect of his fellow writers was in some way the weaknesses of their physical bodies and so on. So a lot of these kinds of characters in philosophy, there's Friedrich Nietzsche, within the Indian tradition, Gandhi, of course, represents this in a certain way. We see him, we idolize him perhaps as a Mahatma, but if you see some of his remarks, like he would whisper to younger people, you're young now, but I could walk you into the ground. So he was very proud of his stamina, and so on. So there have been people. Lord Byron is another one. I'm absolutely fascinated with the romantic poet Byron, who was the one who really invented long distance open water swimming. He swam from Europe to Asia across the Bosphorus. He swam. He would do these long swims, and he was the greatest poet of his day. So there have been people in history who have merged the physical and the intellectual in a way that I have found very, very inspirational. We all know Leonardo da Vinci, and that he's the greatest, craftsman of fine art in his day. But very few of us know that every morning his real aim in life was to to unbend a horseshoe, and he would line up 4 of his apprentices every morning. They really hated this. They were terrified of it. He would line them up. He would go back 30 meters, and every morning he would run towards them and try to leap over all 4 of them. Inevitably, the person in the front would get kneed in the head and be bloody and so. But Da Vinci, despite his genius as an artist, was obsessed with cultivating his physical virtues. So there are these really bizarre people across history. I just named 6 from different countries and cultures and eras who have tried to do this. So I took it on as an obsession, kind of modeling myself on these people. I know it's very strange, Chetan, but that's how it comes about. And certainly it's uncommon. It's uncommon.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that is fascinating. I had no idea, but there is some sort of a connection one can imply, because I think when we write, we're not just writing all the time. A lot of times we're thinking about things and processing stuff and just synthesizing things we may have read. And that kind of an activity really allows for you to do all of that. I mean, yeah.
Can I tell you one thing? This
Sure.
might be relevant for writers. I have a friend in Norway who published a book on the same topic in the same year as I published a book back in 2017. And my book was fine. I read his book and I couldn't believe the dynamism in his prose. It was just extraordinary. And I rang him up and I said, we both have talked about these topics for a year, and your book comes out and it's 5 times more interesting than mine. How is this possible? How come your prose is so punchy? How have you done this? And he said, well, the real reason is because I moved my laptop onto my treadmill and I wrote this book entirely walking. So he had a indoor treadmill, and he could fix his laptop to it. Yeah. I wrote my next book like that, and it changed my prose. So, I'm not saying this is universal, but there are these intimate relationship between the physical and the way that you're writing, just as you had mentioned, that you have to find what suits you, what works for you, but you have to find something, because being a sort of a sloth sitting down for 12 hours at the desk isn't the way that you produce something great anymore.
Nice. So you have like a walking desk, that's what they call it, I think. You don't really run while you're writing, but you're moving, you're walking most of the time, yes?
A slow-paced walk, yeah. No more than 4 kilometers per hour.
Right.
But I keep the desk there on the treadmill. Now I have to admit, I did this only for one book, and it worked wonderfully. But then later I started different things. I think the most important of which, you said that you're a marathon runner.
Yeah.
I feel writing a book is a marathon.
Yep.
It's certainly not a sprint. And so how do you develop the endurance, the stamina to run a marathon? Through exercise. There are all kinds of ways of training yourself. And I feel analogously, I do all of the same when I'm working on a book. So if you're exhausted, then you rest. If you are, one-to-one with training, you have to do it every day. Otherwise you get lazy. You have to do it systematically. You have to do it with the right nutrition. You have to do it with the right mentality. You have to do it with the right hygiene. Everything is significant in succeeding in a marathon run and writing a book. So they're perfectly analogous, and I employ the exact same methods for both things.
That's fascinating. That's a really interesting idea. Maybe I should try it. I mean, I have a work desk and a chair, and I have a treadmill next to me, but those are separate activities. So I don't think it'll be too hard, even if I just put one can think of things. So yes, I should definitely.
You could try, experiment. Yeah,
can try that. Cool. So we're opening it up for questions now, folks. But while I ask Aakash my last question, and then anything that you want to shoot, you can send into the chat. So Aakash, I know that you're working on like lots of academic projects and lots of books and things. What are you looking at next now? What's next for you?
So right now I'm finishing the second volume of the biography, because the biography is in 2 volumes. First
Yes.
volume out. But to be honest, that's actually done.
Okay.
I just wanted I wanted the first volume to be out. I wanted to see how it was received, the critical comments, what people liked, what people didn't, to do the rewrite of the second volume accordingly. You know, did I make a blunder? Do I need to change something? Do I need to be even more audacious than I was in the first one? So I take in all of the critical feedback and I redraft the second volume accordingly. It will be out soon. At the same time, there's a book I'm working on that I have been working on for many, many years that I gave up very stupidly when COVID hit. Because when COVID hit, this topic disappeared from public discourse. And I thought, okay, it's irrelevant now. And you'll never guess what that is. It's AI. So,
okay, fascinating.
You know, the day that COVID was no longer on everybody's mind, AI became the only thing everybody's talking about. And I curse myself every day. You know, you have to remain faithful to your idea. It was fascinating to me. I wanted to work on it. I worked on it for years. It was conceptually ready. I had the outline and everything. And then I dropped it because I thought nobody was interested. And this is just further evidence that you can't work like that, right? You work on what is fascinating, what is drawing you, what is compelling you. So now I'm going to finish that book as soon as the biography is done. It's called Why AI Will Murder Us All. And it's subtitled Bots, Droids, Cyborgs, and the Future of Humanity. But to be honest, that book is also almost done because I have the entire outline. I've thought about it for years and years. And it's not a difficult book to write once you've mastered the technology. Everything else is just, you know, social commentary and things like that. And then there's another project that I'm very eager to complete, which is called Mind and Muscle, on the unity of intellectual and physical virtues. That kind of talks about some of the things I was mentioning to you before, some predecessors who have tried to unify it. Why is it that we find today that you're either an intellectual, and that intellectuals are often kind of physically broken down, or that you are, let's say, a bodybuilder or whatever, who has a reputation for being ignoramus and having a low IQ? What is it about human nature, if anything, that prevents the simultaneous prowess, both in the arts or aesthetics or the life of the mind and in physical culture? So this is obviously dear to my heart. So I've basically given you the next 3 books that are on their way.
I'm fascinated. And I'm really going to try and, you know, keep a lookout for them. So no new books on wine, because there was this very interesting thing, which was an aside completely. I have to tell you that I'm scrolling through, you know, Aakash's repertoire of books, and it's a very impressive and very detailed repertoire. And in the middle of that, there is a book which is titled The Complete Indian Wine Guide. So so it's not a shock when he's saying he's going to write about AI, because it's like, you know, he writes about wine, and then he writes about Ambedkar, and then he writes about, you know, Hegel. So hey, why not AI? But where did the book on wine come from? I mean, that was just so much, such a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, you know, for the longest time, I had thought that was my best book.
Okay.
And it was only Ambedkar's Preamble, the previous one, that made me think I've finally done something better than the wine book. All of my other nonfiction, even the Hegel book was nominated for Book of the Year.
Yep.
But even I didn't think it had surpassed the wine book.
Okay.
So, and I mentioned one thing because it goes back to one of your first or second questions. The reason the wine book I felt was so good was because it was based on quote unquote archival research, not just drinking, but I went to every winery in India. That was 2004, 5, 6, around that time. It was not easy. You know, Nashik now is a big tourist resort. You can go to Sula and stay in luxury bungalows amongst the vineyards, and it's all very beautiful. 2004 and 5, you have had hacked through with a machete to find, you know, civilization. It was a very different experience, but the commitment to turn up at every winery in the country gave me that kind of original body of information that nobody else in the country had, because no one was ridiculous enough to spend, you know, hours and days and months traveling from winery to winery under great peril. But the book, you know, I love wine. I have always loved wine. So it was just, I was disgusted. In India, every book about wine was about France and Australia and things like that. And I knew we had a wine culture that was emerging. So I thought someone has to get this ball rolling. And so I did that research. I wrote that book, and I'm very, very proud of that book.
Awesome.
To write a second one now, we have, at the time I wrote that, we had about 75 labels, you know, different kinds of wine in India. Now there must be 700.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I don't think my liver can take the research.
But that's exactly the kind of research that I think, you know, you're inspiring us now to to do more primary research. Yeah, in fact, you know, this is an aside most people won't know, but because of the wine trend in India taking off, not because, but sort of, it was a coincidence. But I also co-founded a small cheese making business right here in the mountains. It sells under the brand name Old Hill, and we sell it mainly in Delhi and in Bangalore and Nature's Basket and some. So it's artisanal handmade cheese, and of course, you know, I think cheese and wine kind of have the similar graph when it comes to the trajectory that they follow.
That's great.
Yeah, another interesting bit of trivia is that the gentleman who manages the Himalayan Writing Retreat, who is like the hospitality in charge, is actually a trained sommelier who gave up drinking. So you have such people, but his interest now is writing, so he chooses to help us run the Himalayan Writing Retreat.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, we seem to attract the most interesting kinds of to come and work with us. So, okay, I'm going to open it up to the questions we've got. So the first is from Lee. He's saying, I'm a fiction author, so in no way am I bound to the level of accuracy that you are. However, there are times when authenticity is paramount in fiction. And I found that India is not very forthcoming with what I call inconvenient truths. So traffic fatality statistics, heroin addiction, homelessness, and stuff like that. So do you encounter these difficulties in research, and how do you overcome them?
That's a great question. I don't know how to answer it in its totality, because you're coming from the point of view of fiction, and then the need for some sort of accuracy in fiction, and then the third issue about the social unwillingness to digest some of those facts. And I suppose the fourth step, which you didn't articulate, would be that if society is, if these truths are too inconvenient to society, do I need to remain faithful to them in my fiction? I mean, that might be another consideration. As for just answering from within the experience of nonfiction writing, inconvenient truths are the bread and butter of a nonfiction writer. If we were to attempt to cover what everyone was comfortable digesting, we wouldn't be producing anything new or innovative or inspirational or awakening or novel in any way. So it becomes very, very important for us to go against the grain of sort of majoritarian social interests. I can't speculate for you whether the same strategy would work in fiction. I really don't know, but I can tell you that from vantage point of nonfiction, being an outlier is essential. In some ways, it's essential. And you just take, my input and think about it in your own genre. My hunch is that it's probably the same, especially thinking about the fiction that I love, from Nabokov to Mishima to Dostoevsky and Gogol. I think each of them has shown a mirror to society, but with a clarity that is far greater than what society is comfortable with.
Great. That's a great answer. In fact, I think inconvenient truths and whether or not we should write about them is even an important thing for fiction writers to think about, because if you look at the most interesting stories, they are not the most convenient ones. They are the ones that provoke you into thought. And stories sometimes can do that even better than nonfiction. So Lee, you were in the workshop. So we've read Kritika's story. Kritika Pandey, who won the Commonwealth Short Story Prize for a story called Great Indian Tea and Snakes. I'll send you the link, Aakash. You should check it out. It's a small piece, but it's about the inconvenient truths that we're facing right now. So
I see. Great.
Yeah, very much so. Great, thank you. The next question is from Kamal Deep. He's saying, as a philosopher, have you looked at philosophy of complex adaptive systems, covering some popular topics like chaos, butterfly effect, and other esoteric topics, such as inability of long-term prediction / emergence, etc. Examples are like Ilya Prigogine, End of Certainty. I'm exploring that topic and would like some references.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm going to say something that you might find bizarre, not just as a philosopher, but as a writer, as someone whose imagination is sparked. Right? We're a different breed in some respect because we live in a dialectic of our own mind and our experience, whereas academics maybe more in their own mind, and laymen maybe more in just the everyday. So writers, of course, have this dialectic that is unique, and it brings us often in, makes us sympathetic one with another. That that being said, I look into so much that is bizarre. I'm absolutely fascinated with ufology, the study of UFOs and alien species. And, one day I'm even thinking about writing a kind of guide to the varieties of aliens and extraterrestrials that all of these encounters and interviews with people who claim to have seen them, to type them and to arrange them in a kind of ethnography of extraterrestrials. So it's not just as a philosopher; it's as a writer, someone who doesn't trust always the ordinary and the mainstream. So you just get in touch with me and I can send you all kinds of references along the lines that you've mentioned, and from butterfly to everything else. The question is how much of it is useful, how much of it is, there are various rabbit holes that you can go down So you have to really remain cautious. There was in the 1960s, 1970s, there was an era at Princeton University after Einstein at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton, after Einstein was on his way down, when real strange intellectuals gathered around there. The Wilhelm Reich, the inventor of the orgasmatron, Worlds in Collision. What is that author's name? Immanuel Velikovsky, who had hypothesized that the reason some of our planets are spinning in the wrong way is because they were all colliding, and that human beings in the old religious texts from the Bible to the Mahabharata and so on, you find mentioning of the parting of the seas or people floating into the air. He thinks this was a disruption in Earth's gravitational fields, and these people were at serious places like the Institute for Advanced Study, but they were so bizarre. It was something that was happening around that time where I guess methods were not yet established, but people's intellect was operating at very high speed. So you can get lost in all of this, and so you have to set some guardrails for yourself. But I'd be happy to discuss further with you some of that literature that I think is helpful to thinking creatively about writing.
Great. So do I have your permission to share your email address in the group?
Oh, yeah, of course. Right.
So I'll do that.
Aakash Singh Rathore at yahoo.com. You can share it. I'm always happy to.
Awesome. Great. We have a couple more questions. How do you transition between academic writing and commercial writing?
That is... Oh, okay. I'm sorry. How do you transition between academic and commercial as in trade, like
yes, trade.
Oxford to HarperCollins or something like that? Yeah, that takes trial and error. I'll tell you, I wrote a couple of books around 2016, 2017 that I sent to trade publishers, so Penguin, HarperCollins, Juggernaut, Aleph, publishers like that, and it was rejected by all of them. And then I published them with Routledge and Oxford and so on. So I'm telling you this to let you know two things. It's not an easy thing to do, first of all, and secondly, you will get rejected. So you have to keep, understand why it was that, try to understand why it was that the commercial publisher turned you down, and what it was that the academic publisher was interested in, and maybe begin to slowly reverse that. But that is not an easy thing to achieve. It takes trial and error, and it takes being rejected and coming back, redrafting, and trying again.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. The next question was, how long did it take you to write your book on Ambedkar? And do you work simultaneously on, or do you work on multiple books at one time?
Yeah, so the Becoming Baba Sahib, it took me about 10 years to do the research, and about 8 months to write. So a big difference there in the amount of time that I spent researching, and the amount of time writing, because 8 months is not a long time for writing, but 10 years is far too long for researching, unless you're James Joyce and someone. So how long did that take? And what was the second part?
The second one was, do you work simultaneously on multiple books?
Yeah, okay. So part of why it took 10 years is I don't ever write one book at a time, or rather the writing itself. So I said 8 months. Yes, I didn't write anything when I was physically writing the biography. So researching, creating tables of contents, creating abstracts for each of the chapters, All of that I do every day for at least I would say the next 5 books that I have in mind.
Okay.
But my routine, a lot of writing I feel is routine. So my routine when I sit down to write and exclusively do that, the only thing I write is the current book.
Okay.
Then when I get too tired to write, because I find writing very, very difficult and exhausting, when I get too tired to have that energy that puts words onto a page, you can still do ancillary things. You can read, you can copy edit, you can proofread, or what I like to do is start organizing other book projects and so on. Part of why I'm continuing beyond the answer, because I think this can be important for writers. Part of why I do it is I have this bad habit, but I think it's not unique to me, of always wanting to be doing something else other than what I'm doing. And so if I'm writing the biography on Ambedkar, I'm cursing myself. Why am I doing this? I want to be writing the AI book. And if I take a break from the biography and I start writing the AI book, I start thinking, you know what? I should have written that chapter differently. I wish I were working on that, the biography. And so I always have this restlessness, and that restlessness can be very destructive and prevent you from working. So what I've tried to do over the years is figure out how to harness all of my anxieties and distractions and so on into productivity. And how that works is, if I'm restless to do something else, I start doing it for a bit, but not the actual writing, but the organization. Get a plot, get an outline, do some research. What books do I need to read? What articles should I read? And so on. And then I put that aside. And then the next morning, when I'm high energy and focused, I start doing my main writing again. So since the actual process of physically writing words onto a page is so high intensity, I always save my freshest time to do that, and then I use the rest of the day when I'm too tired to put all of the things that distract me. So oh, you want to be writing the other book? Okay, you start doing that at 5 p.m. after I've been writing the main book from 7 to 4 p.m. So I do multiple, but with a kind of strategic plan that is very routine, in order to be able to make doing that, working on multiple projects simultaneously, productive rather than destructive.
Interesting. That's a very insightful answer, because I know that we call it the shiny new object syndrome, but that does and that's a common affliction. So it's an interesting way that you have to manage the whole thing. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Akhil has the next question. He's saying, I'm from Nasik. It's nice to know that for the research for the wine book, you went around in Nasik. So were you living in the city when you did your research? That's the question.
Yes, I stayed there for a few weeks. You only go after the harvest and the winemaking process, so you don't really. It doesn't take much time, but the difficulty is going from winery to winery. At that time, they were very widespread. Government started opening things like wine parks and all of that. So today, you could probably visit 12 wineries in one afternoon.
Yeah.
At that time, it took 12 afternoons to visit 2 wineries.
Cool. And the last question we have here, people really appreciate your tip of harnessing anxiety and converting it into productivity. The last question is from Weber. He's saying, how many hours do you write every day?
Oh, so so physically writing, Hemingway used to, um, uh, I don't know, Chetan, if I'm saying something that's so obvious to your group, but in order to know how to write, I would read writers on how they wrote. So I found that extremely useful, because it also, learning about different writers' routines, they would all have different routines. Murakami has written extensively about his writing routine. Mishima wrote about his, Hemingway wrote about his. So I would read all of the different routines and then find the one that suits me. So what I do is, because my day is divided into basically 4 different domains of activity. One is my family, one is my training for Ironman and so on. One is writing, my work, and one is I don't know how to name it publicly. It's you see, these first 3 things are all egocentric, right? It's my family, it's my training, it's my writing. So I always try to incorporate at least an hour in the day when I'm doing something for somebody else. So whether I'm, that's why I gave you my email, right? Because someone's going to email me and it's going to take me 20 minutes to reply. And that 20 minutes, I'm doing something for somebody else, not for me. So in a day, I always try to schedule 1 hour where I'm not focused on my ego. And I feel that is it's therapeutic in a way, because part of writers, sometimes we get very obsessive, and just turning off and doing something completely for someone else at your own expense and energy, I find replenishes me for the next day of work. So since my life is divided into these 4 quadrants, I have to balance these things. I do 3 hours of training. I do 1 hour of this kind of work for other people. I try to make sure that I spend at least 3 hours taking care of my children and spending it with my family. And the rest goes into mundane things, the majority of which is eating and preparing food and things like that, which is why I have this bizarre habit of eating only once in a day. I learned that from Buddhism, but it's become a fad called OMAD, 1 meal a day. And I started doing that when I realized that there's not enough time in the day to do all 4 of these things. And I realized that when we don't eat, we save time washing the dishes, buying the groceries, preparing the food, and the physical act of eating also takes hours. So I find that each day I win 3 hours by eating only once. So then I spend the rest of the day writing, but that means from the morning until I'm exhausted. And so when I'm exhausted, then if I have extra hours devoted to the writing, to the work period, I spend that with the shiny, how did you call it? The shiny object?
Shiny new object.
The shiny new object. I spend that on the shiny new object, or organizing things or whatever. And then I divide. So I would say it's about 8 hours in a day when I'm writing. But if I'm too tired after 5 hours, I don't stand and stare at the computer. I immediately, when I realize more words are not coming out at a rate that is efficient, I shut this project, I make a note of where I am, and then I move on to my next book, my next project, something like that.
That's absolutely fascinating. So I was thinking that go ahead.
On Instagram, each month I post my routine precisely both for athletes and for authors, because everyone always asks me, how do you do all of those things? There's only one answer there are 2 real answers. One is genius, which I don't have, and the other is discipline, which I do. So if you don't have genius, some of us might, I'm sure 1 out of the 30 of us here might. It's not me. I don't know if it's you, Chetan. If you don't have that, then the only other thing you can have is discipline. And if you want to write, if you want to succeed at writing, let's say. So what I do is I focus on discipline, and that gets back to the very first question. I mean, why am I an Ironman? Because I realized that to be successful as a writer, I need iron will and discipline and routine and training, and I need to do it every day, and I need to figure out how to do something very hard without killing myself. And that's what it takes to do an Ironman. It's also what it takes to write a book.
Wow. That's that's incredible. I mean, I'm hats off. That's just a revelation. I had no idea that, you had so much structure and planning that you had done for your writing to make space for everything that was really important in your life. So it's a very inspiring and new way of thinking about things. So thank you for sharing that. So we seem to have run out of questions. We don't have anything else. We talked about the word count just yesterday, so I don't know if we need to spend time on that. So I think we can end this session here, but thank you so much for taking the time, Aakash. And I would love to host you here. We eat more times a day than is healthy for anybody at the Himalayan Writing Retreat. But and I can see Reno's on here. Reno's going to be here in a month and a half. So we should cover our faces and not tell Aakash about how much we eat when we're here. But yes, but I'd love to host you and love to have you here. And there's a lot of runners who come here to train for altitude training. They're at 6,500 feet. So, this is another place where you can do both things. You can train at a high altitude for Ironman. There's no water. So swimming is going to be hard, but we're water deficient and we harvest all our rainwater and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But cycling and running is very, very doable. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. I was a fellow at the Shimla Institute of Advanced Study in Shimla.
Yeah, there you go.
And same altitude. And all I was doing was running, and all the other fellows, you talk about academics versus athletes and so on. All I was doing was running, and all of the other fellows started to just say that this Aakash, how did he ever get a position here? All he does is run, so, but if you're at 6,500 feet, you have to run. I mean, it's so good for you to.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But I will hold you to that, Chetan. Now that I've seen your grounds and spoken to you also, I'm going to be there. I might even show up uninvited. So
definitely, you're always welcome. It'll be fabulous to meet you in person, Aakash.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Good luck.
Thank you, everybody, and thanks again, Aakash. It's just wonderful.